everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening. This is a really exciting evening for us all. Thank you for coming to attend the documentary about our friend now, Mike Sapuppo, this evening on this, the 55th anniversary of the first Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. We are honoured to share Mike's story with you here at the North Andover Historical Society's amazing solar-powered Warden Theatre at the Stevens Centre, here on July the 20th, 2024. When we were first contacted by Susan Grabsky at the Lawrence History Centre and heard the story of Mike, we were amazed but not surprised to hear that a lifelong resident of our corner of the Merrimack Valley had had such an impact on our world and beyond. Mike's story about a young man who wasn't sure of his role in the world or what skills he had to contribute meaningfully to it is a story as old as time. And you will see in this documentary, Mike's impact to science and technology was crucial to the moon landings. Mike's story is the inspiration behind our planned legacy exhibit, with which we hope to highlight the premise that our early steps don't always define who we will become, nor do they define our potential to change the world. This exhibit, planned for 2025, will feature a collection of small exhibits focused on the lives of normal people from our region and the small, seemingly insignificant steps they made that, looking back, changed the world or a part of it for the better. We couldn't have produced this documentary without our very own talented archivist, Robin Siegel, who came over to Mike's house in Andover in the spring and interviewed him. And of course, for the support and advice and technical skills of North Andover Camp, particularly young man Nick Maxwell, who put this together, and Brian Fraser, the director. If you're interested in finding out more, you can take my business card from the lobby, visit our website, and join the North Andover Historical Society as a member. Established in 1913, the North Andover Historical Society remains dedicated in its mission to discover, preserve, and share the unique history of North Andover. Throughout the years, our mission has evolved, yet one thing remains unchanged: our commitment to bringing history to life for our community in North Andover, the Merrimack Valley, and beyond. We are a non-profit organization and depend on your donations. This event is being put on at no charge, so please don't forget to leave a donation if you can when you leave. Please note, no food or drink are permitted in the theatre except for water. The theatre and the Stevens Centre Museum are also available for private events, movie screenings, reunions, and other gatherings. I would just like to remind you of our safety and courtesy considerations before we get started. Please put your cell phones and any other noisemakers on silent mode during the presentation. Please refrain from eating and drinking, and in case of an emergency, there are two exits. There's the door that you came in, and then there's the exit right here to your right. That's all I've got. I'm going to let the documentary speak for itself. Welcome, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the show. Our early steps don't always define who we become, and they don't define our potential to change the world. Sometimes it's by getting lucky, meeting the right people, being in the right place at the right time, or using your initiative. Sometimes you have to endure tough circumstances, which make you more resilient. Sometimes you rise to matter.
I tell the kids in North Andover this story many times. My whole life I wanted to be an attorney. Through high school and college, that was my plan. And then for 2 years, I did not get into law school. And that was tough news. What am I going to do with my life? And I had always been doing things like working with kids during that period of time. And it took my sister-in-law to say to me, I'm not sure you'd be a good attorney anyways, you're too nice. Why don't you do what you love to do, and that's work with kids. So a door closed for me, and I actually was able to experience the passion of my life.
Mike Sapuppo grew up in Lawrence and eventually made his way to MIT and then to working with the United States government to create devices that would help the Apollo astronauts make it to the moon in 1969.
I was born in Lawrence, and on Jackson Street in particular in Lawrence, North Lawrence. My early education was the kindergarten to 6, was at the Lay School. I remember the first day that my mother took me there. For some reason, I was very unhappy and cried, and so she had to take me back. We went back the second day, and I loved it. It was a complete turnaround experience, and school was wonderful from that point on. I enjoyed that whole period. I guess I was all right. I guess I got good marks. I don't remember. My mother knows. But yeah, so it was not a problem. It was a good environment, and I had a lot of friends. When I grew up, I spent a lot of time in my father's garage, and I met a lot of people. We had quite a variety of customers, and one of them was a close friend, and he advised me to go to Harvard, and he felt that at Harvard I'd be a big fish in a small pond compared to MIT, which would be a small fish in a big pond. That was his analysis, or his approach to it, what he told me, and I said, well, it sounded like good. So I went ahead and applied to Harvard, and I got turned down. And so I had no other place to go. I did get accepted at Georgia Tech, but I didn't want to leave the area. And I realized at the time that I was really deficient in my ability to write. And that problem had to be solved if I was going to get ahead. I knew that then, that was a problem. I started every paragraph with a dangling participle phrase as an example. I was a very poor writer. And that's what prompted me to go to Phillips Academy. And they did a very good job. I had an English teacher there, Mr. Girash, and every day we had to write what we had read, about what we had read the night before. So we're constantly writing summaries of readings. And that training was absolutely necessary for me. I went there in the summer, by the way, and initially I took an English course, and I was actually flunking. And the instructor met me at one point and said, you know, I don't think you're going to make it, basically, and was suggesting that I quit. And because I had already paid my tuition for that course, I said I might as well, you know, bear it out and finish it up and see what happens. Well, he gave me a passing grade. I think he must have felt sorry for me. And he did give me a passing grade, and I was able to spend the next year at Phillips. They were accustomed to having young students come there to supplement or sometimes complement their education from high school. So it wasn't unusual for them, and I was accepted. But you needed, one of the requirements was 2 years of 2 languages, 2 foreign languages, to get a degree, a diploma. Otherwise, you got a certificate if you didn't pass that, okay? So they had a program for that. And it was Spanish 1-2. So he had 2 years of Spanish in 1 year by Mr. Taylor, a wonderful teacher. And there was about 6 of us in that course. It was a very small group. And I guess they have to do the same thing to graduate with a diploma. And we were all flunking out the first term. And I remember he said, look, if you're willing to come back and spend a little more time in class, he says, I'm willing to do that and help you out. And that's what we did. We went, and I went back after class, as did the other 5. And we got to the point where we read the same book that the 3rd-year students were reading in Spanish, called Pensativa. It was a novel that had some acclaim. And we ended up reading that book before the 3rd-year students had finished it. They were reading the same book, but we were ahead. So that was the kind of intensity that went into the coursework, and the spirit that we had. And as a result, that year at Phillips was very rewarding, because it made my first year at MIT, no, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was okay, it was good. I didn't have any real problems there. And even in the second year, I did reasonably well in the second year. And it was the 3rd year was called the gut year. They that was thermodynamics, was a tough course, but I got through with it. And in the last year, everything was fine. I made the honor roll finally. I got an honor. So it was a journey. When I went to MIT, my father was paying for the tuition and my board initially. To lessen the burden on my father, I became a busboy, basically. And I served, I bussed at both noontime meal and the evening meal at the dining hall. And I luckily picked the Graduate House Dining Hall, which was sort of a unique place for graduate students. That was the building the Ashdown House was called, in memory of Dr. Ashdown, who taught at MIT. And and my routine there was to work 2 hours when I got, and for that 2 hours of work, I would get $1.20, 60 cents an hour, and my meal. So I worked for my meal as a busboy, so I ate well. And the same thing in the evening, but there was a special situation there that was an add-on benefit, if you will, in that downstairs in the Ashdown House, they had, there was at least 3, maybe 4 rooms where banquets were held and meetings were held, dinner meetings were held by the professors. And different societies had meetings on there. And so you had a bus, they would have the dinner, and you had a bus for them. And that produced not only $1.20 an hour, $1.20, but you got the tips. There were tips involved in that.
Mike graduated from MIT and fulfilled his ROTC commitment by serving in the military for 2 years. His good luck and willingness to take the initiative led him on the path to be able to make an impact when the opportunity arose. He was an instrumental part of the team that was designing an accelerometer that would be used for the Apollo program.
I couldn't project what happened. I think I was lucky. I was at the right place at the right time. When I got out of service, I went back to MIT and spoke to Miss Yates, who was in the lobby of the entrance to MIT, and I said, introduced myself. I said, I'm a graduate of MIT in mechanical engineering, and I said, and I'm looking for a job. Is anybody hiring? And it so happened that she was fingering some of the cards in her file, 3x5 file. She said she stopped in the middle of that, and she said, "Oh," she says, "I just got a call from one of the laboratories," she says, "and they're looking for a mechanical engineer." And she says, "Are you interested in working for MIT?" And I said, "Sure." So that's how I came to the instrumentation laboratory under Doc Draper. Doc Draper was the head of the aeronautics and later aeronautics and astronautics department at MIT. He became interested in gyros and accelerometers in a very early time because he had his own plane. He could fly a plane, a one-engine plane, and he was concerned about the control. And that's where this technology kind of entered his mind, the need for independent control of a vehicle. The gyro measures angular positioning, and the accelerometer measures velocity, actually. And then the system will keep track of time, so it integrates down to distance. So it goes from acceleration to velocity. This device gives you a velocity output directly because it rotates, and you pick off the velocity. This one is not an integrating accelerometer, and it merely gives you an angle. And so you have to integrate twice in the system and come up with the distance traveled. So it's handled a different way, but the end result is you know where you are. In a missile, for example, I think it's easier to explain there. If you want to hit a target, you fly the missile on a trajectory, and the critical event is to shut down the engine. And the Germans, who designed missiles earlier on, before we did, named that event Brennschluss. Brenn for burning and Schluss for shutdown. And so if you shut down the engine too soon, you didn't reach the target. If it was the opposite, you went over. So the signal that goes to the computer to shut down the engine comes from the accelerometer. That's why it's so important. And the gyro merely in the system maintain a level platform, so there's no other twisting or turning within the instrument, within the missile. So it maintains the reference platform, and it's the accelerometer that gives that critical signal to the to shut down the engine. This is the accelerometer, and it's designated MIT Instrumentation Laboratory, Apollo, pulse integrating pendulum, and all the serial number and so forth. And we actually built this in the lab. And there was also a magnetic suspension that required capacitors to operate. And they're in this package that goes along with it. The only component in there that was fairly unique that we developed during the Apollo program, and I subsequently used it in the other devices that I designed later on, were the bellows. These are plated bellows. They compensate for the pressure changes within the instrument when temperatures change. But because it does vary, you don't want excessive pressures to build up at extreme temperatures for any reason. So you have a bellows that kind of gets squeezed one way or another during any of those periods. And we had, there was a company in Long Island that specialized in this kind of bellows. Typically, bellows are made, they're fairly bulky, and they're usually in the end of the units. We decided to generate a new type of bellows, and this was it. And they're made, it's sort of a Christmas tree kind of assembly, where you have these wax parts on the ends, and they're coated with, they actually build up a coating, a plated coating on them. So, and there's a little hole in the middle, and what happens is when you're finished plating the thickness that you want on that mandrel, you heat it up, and it just the wax melts out, comes out, and then you seal it with a drop of solder in a gas environment. That's all done in a gas environment. So there's a gas in there that, and then you can check it. The gas contains neon, and so you can use a sniffer that determines whether or not there's a leak or not. So you have a way of verifying that these are properly sealed and will not break down in operation. I don't think anybody else had anything like that in their instruments. Subsequent to this development, the units that like this one here, for example, instead of putting a large bellows on the ends, I was able to cut a slot on the sides. So instead of having a bellows on the end caps, which was typical of the gyros before that, I was able to cut slots in the housing and slip these bellows inside them.
Mike hopes to inspire and motivate young people today to be bold, be on the lookout for opportunities, and appreciate your family and those who support you.
Let's say you have to take risks, but they have to be calculated risks, and you have to learn how to calculate your risk. You have, and I think about changes. I remember my boss says there's no small change in this business. So you have to be very careful when you change from one configuration to another, or make adjustments. You reach a point in your design at different times where you want to make a change. What you have to be careful of is when you make that change, you're pretty safe in getting that change done. But in doing that, making that change, you get to the unknown unknowns. You know the change you want to make, but in the process of making that change, you may get some surprises. And that's the unintended consequences that you meet in developing anything new the first time. It's a lesson you learn in engineering, right, and doing things like that. And it's scary because you can control the changes that you have options to include, but you can't include the surprises. You can't control those, they happen. So if you're lucky, it works out. And I was lucky in a lot of areas, I must admit. It's much better to be lucky than to be smart, you know. Throughout my lifetime, I always had tremendous family support. I really did. I was very lucky. It was a close family, and I had an Uncle Gus. He was my father in many respects. So yes, there were many people in my life that I met that influenced my behavior and supported me when I needed the support. My mother was a real, you know, when I retired in 37 years in 91, she was alive and well. She didn't have, she died from eventually having a stroke, but she was sharp as a, so she reminded me that I had said, apparently, I had forgotten, that I was going to the lab for about 5 years, and then I would go out and start my own company. I says, Mom, I had my own company. I loved it here. So I had a very happy career. I have no qualms or regrets.
For the last 37 years, I've been the Youth and Recreation Director for the town of North Andover, a job that I absolutely love. I get up every single day with a passion to make a difference. and it has just been a joy to experience my life as the Youth Services Director. But in those 37 years, so many young kids come to me panicking about, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I don't know what I want to be. And what you really need to do is to basically tune out some things. I think there's some pressure from people to, you should do this, or almost some fear, like I better do something that can make some money or something like that. And the reality here is you need to be curious. You need to kind of come out of your comfort zone and experience a number of different things. And because what you are looking for is to try to find your purpose and passion in life. I live a life where I truly believe if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And as I will continue to work with young high school and college kids on what they are going to be doing, is to take a deep breath. Don't get so stressed out about it. Try to work at different things. Try to experience and try to take notes around what you really want to do, what drives you, what motivates you, what makes you passionate. And at some point in time, you will find out what really makes you tick, and then you're going to do it, and hopefully you too will also find a job that you love, and you'll never work a day in your life.
By meeting Mike, the North Andover Historical Society has been inspired to create a new legacy exhibit. This exhibit, planned for 2025, will feature a collection of exhibits focused on the lives of normal people and the small, seemingly insignificant steps they made at the time, but looking back, they made a difference. It will place a spotlight on individuals from our region who may have not been focused on a particular path to success or known what they wanted to do from an early age, but looking back, they changed the world, or a small part of it, for the better. Well, thank you everybody for participating and watching this great documentary. It's meeting Mike just in January of this year, as you can see, has inspired myself and the staff, as well as the people at North Andover Camp that were involved in the documentary. And it means so much to us that you were able to allow yourself to be interviewed and trusted in us to actually put a good documentary together and to depict the story of your life, because it means so much both to you and your great family, as I can see, but as well the message for other people, and especially young people today, is really important. Thank you. I don't know whether anybody has any questions. If you do have questions, we'll have Mike come and take a seat at the front. If you want to, if we don't have so many people who want to have questions answered, maybe we can just go and have a casual little time in the lobby with the food that Lisa brought in. But can you put your hands up and let me know if you have any questions for Mike specifically? Okay, so Mike, would you like to come and take a seat at the front and you can answer some questions? So, who had a question?
I can talk loud.
Yeah, go on. We're casual here.
My question is, how was this instrument that you worked on, I take it at MIT at the Draper Labs, used in the moon landing? And why is it titled "We Barely Made It Back"?
Well, the guidance system was designed to help you guide, go to the moon. I mean, basically, when it was in the capsule, and that's what they depended on to determine where they were at any one time when they were in space. Now, what I remember is that, and as I say, you need a gyro and you need an accelerometer to configure this system.
The gyros would keep a level platform. I think it mentioned something like that in the documentary. It kept a reference platform, and regardless of what turning or twisting occurred when you were up in space, you remained stable. And then the accelerometers would tell you where you were actually heading. What else do I want to say?
So why, isn't the title of this, we barely made it back? I know when they
So
wanted.
I can answer that
Yeah,
question.
please.
Let me sit down with Matt quickly. So, this interview that Robin and Brian Fraser from North Andover CAM spent over 2.5 hours with Mike recording this documentary. And of course, in the clipping room, it got put down quite considerably because we had to tell the story, we had some questions to ask. But that was one of Mike's quotes as part of his introductory story when I actually went with all of our staff. And it just is a really interesting juxtaposition because all of the work and all of the design that was involved and everything that Mike was doing, it was always touch and go. It was always, they never knew that they were going to make it there. So basically, it's a vision, and obviously they accomplished it, and we're here today to tell the great story. But the work and the effort that Mike and Doc Draper and all of these other people were involved in, all of the brain work and all of the thinking that went into it, wasn't necessarily guaranteed to accomplish anything. And I thought that was pretty amazing because as we know, we're 55 years beyond the Apollo 11 moon landing, and that was a real inspiring moment for me to hear that.
Okay, let me say a few things. When you design an instrument for a system that's used on a strategic, on a missile, I'm thinking of Polaris, Poseidon, Trident 1, 2, 3, Minuteman that's still in the field. When you're designing for those systems, you're not worried too much about somebody getting hurt. In fact, you design it to hurt somebody if you have to. So there are no people at risk for those applications. But this was Apollo. You had some astronauts, and who were flying, and you had to guide them. And you couldn't afford a failure. So that was very important. That kind of, dominate the thinking at the time. And you had to have reliable performance.
I remember when they were landing, that they had mapped out a specific spot, but then when they were flying the moon lander, that it wasn't level. There was some rocks there, and Neil Armstrong had to manually take control and land in a different spot. Nearby, I presume. Obviously, they didn't waste much gas to get fuel. But in any case, it's remarkable to me that 55 years ago, we had devised all of that. He was able to take control, land the thing successfully. They stayed there and took off successfully, and we all know then we came back. Now, just this year, they sent the thing up to the moon. It can't land it because it fell over. I mean, it landed someplace. And I just think 55 years ago, we figured this out. What's wrong with these people now?
I have no part of that.
Oh, more questions. Lady in the back, please.
Yes, hi. This is such a pleasure and such an honor. So thank you for being here and thank you for creating this piece. heels of your last comment, how do you possibly, and how do you possibly test something like this? I mean, I guess that would apply to a lot of the equipment on the Apollo or on any of these, humongous ships, but how did you specifically make sure this is gonna work?
Right. That was uppermost in our mind. Yes, and there are two things we worry about specifically in assembling a device like this. The device has some very, very small gaps in it. There's an assembly called a float assembly, and it rotates within a case. And it's unbalanced, by the way, and that's part of why it works. But the important thing is that the gap between the part that rotates and the part that's stationary is about the diameter of a hair on the head. Okay? Pretty damn small. Which means you have to keep things clean. I mean, that surface has to be pristine. So we've developed ways of doing that. I mean, we can't tolerate any in situ contamination, anything that might be deposited on it. You can't, doesn't it? And we develop measurement techniques to determine was stickiness in the rotation of that mass within that gap. The other thing that you worry about is when you fill the unit is actually floated. The average density of that mass that has a pendulum and that responds to an input and rotates is floated in a surrounding film of fluid that has the same density as the mass in the center. And that's why it's temperature controlled, because that only occurs at a particular point. It's all predetermined during the assembly. And one of the things you worry about is when you fill the unit with that fluid, you want to completely surround the rotating mass. You don't want any bubbles. There's apt to be reentrant angles where you fill it from one end and it proceeds to fill into the gaps and so forth. And finally, at one point, it's almost impossible to prevent. There's got to be nothing there so that all the fluid can go completely fill the gap at the top, or probably at an angle, depending upon the design. There are places like that. So it's got to be thoroughly evacuated before you start turning on the fluid. And we still have very good means to test for those behaviors. They have signatures that you will find out as you test it in the test. It's interesting that that fluid, by the way, has a property that's very valuable. It has a tendency, you evacuate the fluid as well before you put it in, but it has an affinity for dissolving gases, fortunately. So you still want to fill it to capacity, but as I say, it has that affinity to absorb gases, which means that if you do have some gas, which you didn't take out, it might, and it does. We've seen that signature of gradually these bubbles getting smaller. We couldn't see them, we never take pictures or anything like that, but we were able by testing to observe that behavior occurring. Okay?
Question, did you get a chance to go to NASA, or did you get to,
The only
meet with
time
them?
I went, well, when they first shot up the, sent the, 69, I think, yeah, I was there with my family.
And did you get to meet some of the astronauts as well?
Right? No, we were in the stand, we were out, there was a stand, and you could see the missile on this, big stand, and, I saw it go up. And then that night, I remember when we get back to our dorm room, the cabin that we were renting, we saw this on TV. And I thought that what I believe we saw was the actual, see it going up, the actual landing. But I don't think that's a bad memory, I guess. Couldn't have been, because that happened later. Okay, never mind.
How long did it, I'm sorry, I'll ask your question next. How long did it take to actually land? It was a couple of years before I was born. How long did it take from takeoff to landing on the moon? How much time?
I
Or
don't.
does anybody know that?
2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
At that time.
all right, question.
Yes, I just wanted to add a little anecdote to Uncle Mike there, Cindy. Hi.
Oh, Cindy.
My mom was the sister of Mike's wife, Helen, and my mom was the eldest and the worrier. And when Helen told my mom that she was going to take the family in the family wagon and drive from Massachusetts to Cape Canaveral, way before Google Maps or GPSs. She had a map, paper map, I remember this clearly, from the AAA, totally mapped out where they were going. I think there were 5 children at that time, in '69.
Yeah. Well, we were,
No,
we had all 6.
Oh, did you
We
have all?
took Chris, the youngest, we took with
The
us.
baby, and my mother was like, "Are you out of your mind? Why don't you just sit down and watch this and, and on your TV at home?" She said, "Absolutely not, we are gonna go, we're gonna join Mike, we are gonna watch that liftoff, this is history, I was so inspired that when I became a mom, I remember crazy ideas that kind of came back, I said, "I'm gonna do it. I'm not just gonna sit home and watch it on TV." And good for Helen for, having the inspiration and the spirit to go with 6 children and a baby to that distance, and very well mapped out, excited in Cape Canaveral. When she came back and told us the excitement of what it was like to watch that liftoff,
Yeah.
I guess that stayed with us too.
Thoroughly on that. Wait a minute, do you remember
that
about
when you-
Chris?
Well, was that when you put us in the drawers?
Yeah, exactly. The youngest one was a baby, and we didn't have, so I pulled the drawer out, put a blanket in there.
Good enough.
Or the hotels. So they became cribs and it was like it was nothing. In you go.
Didn't even have child seats in those days.
We could have everybody in. I guess I was trying to save money, I don't know. I think there was one cot, I believe.
Me.
Or was
Yeah,
you?
that makes sense.
I hope it's not wrong.
Yeah, it really brought it to life. Any other questions? One more question in the back.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. It was a really amazing time. Everything was being done for the very first time. A lot of the science was all invented. How far out of college were you when this happened? How old were you when?
Well, what was this, in the 60s, this is right
69.
on. 60, with the
He's
60.
95 right
69.
now, in case anyone doesn't realize that.
Well, I was a 52 graduate from MIT, and 2 years later, I went into the service. I went into ROTC while I was at MIT. The money was paying about $20 a month, and so that helped me get through. But anyway, I had to meet my commitment once I got out. So that was when I got back and started at the lab. It was 54, September the 8th of
Thank you, amazing.
The laboratory itself actually was founded in '48, the year that I started at MIT. It was kind of coincidental. I realized that later. I don't know if I answered your question.
He was born in 29, so if it was 69.
And thank you, it's an amazing time, it's an awful lot of new intellect going into the industry, creating the industry. And I was just curious where you fell into that range. Were you fresh out of college? Had you been out of college for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And thank you.
So I think you've been out of college for a few years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe 8 years
Yeah.
until 1960,
Thank you.
when you were working on it.
By the way, that was an amazing laboratory. Amazing. It was unique. There's a story I can tell you about that, but we can.
Save that for another day. Question in the back?
I have a question. So you're probably using slide rules and stuff, right?
I'm sorry, what?
You're probably using slide rules?
Yeah, I still have it. I think I did the first year or two.
So here's my basic question, because I remember as a kid watching all this, and thinking to myself, the people who put this all together, the stress and anxiety that you had to go through, hoping it all worked out fine.
Yeah.
How did you cope with all that? How did your
Right.
colleagues and your teammates, how did you all cope with the stress and anxiety of hoping that this all worked out okay?
I guess I have to say we were pretty confident. Rightly or wrongly. I mean, everybody had his job, and everybody was doing a good job. There's a lot of communication. The instrument configuration that I used for Apollo was a relatively simple design, frankly. It was a torque to balance device. So it consisted of a mass in the middle that was floated and unbalanced. And you had a signal generator on one side, and a torque generator on the other side. And the torque generator was not really used except for compensation of any offset that might occur. When you assemble it, you can't make everything line up perfectly. So the mechanical 0 point, the null, and the point and the electrical null are going to be different. So I used one of the magnetic components that I had, called the torque generator, and trickled a little current in it, and it would line up. So I lined up the signal of the null of the mechanical null and the electrical null together. I do that. You know, what's to go wrong? Well, what's to go wrong is the filling. I mean, if you don't fill them correctly, you've got a problem. By the way, I do want to mention who we selected to make the actual units that went in the guidance systems to the moon. And that was Sperry Gyroscope in Long Island. Great Neck, no, Long Island. And I remember going to Houston. I think you mentioned Houston. I remember going to Houston, and they had I think there was 5 respondents to the request for proposal, and they put me in a room, and I read all of them, and I picked Sperry. Now, the laboratory was set up as a design agent for the government. See, we didn't build anything in quantity. So there was no competition between industry and ourselves. And anything we designed and wanted to build, or I should say the government wanted to build, in the quantities that they wanted, they would contract with industry, which meant we turned over our technology. Everything we did was documented and turned over to industry so they could build these devices. You know, we spent about, once we stopped building once the call for newer instruments came about, we reverted to problem solving in industry. I wandered off. It's fun to talk about it.
Well, that I have a thought. I know that you talked to me a couple of times where you would bounce off some of your stress with mom.
Yeah.
The mom would kind of help sometimes when you would talk. Did
Well,
you?
Mom was an important person in my life, as you might expect. And you know, she never complained.
No.
Never said, you know, because I used to go into the lab quite often.
Yeah, we never saw him growing up.
Right, I'd come back, I'd come home
Right.
and eat about 8
It was
o'clock.
hard.
The
And we
kids
were-
were all in bed.
We were always told,
Yeah, right.
when your father
So we
was
felt
home.
fine.
One of the things
But I
that-
would hear some of the problems. On the weekends, I had to forget the laboratory.
Right.
Once I was there,
Right.
you know,
I remember what I would do when he would come home from Draper's, I would grab the suitcase, the briefcase, go into his office, just open it up. And then he would pick through it later after a nap. So that's how he dealt with stress. And we were all told, no screaming, no fighting, no shouting.
Thank you.
And then we'd have dinner, and he'd be very quiet, but then as a habit, he would start up with stories, and the problem is the stories, a little bit like now, had very tangential, side stories too. And we would go, and, okay, and we'd look at the clock, and we gotta go to soccer, or we gotta go here. So very often, I think it was my mother who would take in all the information and very often let it go out the other ear until they could be quietly alone where he could lean on. I don't think they were a group that, went out. I don't think alcohol was involved, if that's what you mean by stress reliever. There was none of that kind of, they didn't do that, they lived at the lab, so we just accepted that was normal. That's just the way life was going to be for a while. So,
One more story about Dr. Draper.
yeah, tell about Doc.
He was a hell of a worker. I mean, he spent, I figured it out, came in, it was in the office at 8 o'clock and wouldn't leave until about 6 o'clock or so. And that hour between 5 and 6, he'd go into the test labs and see what the instruments were doing in the testing. Firsthand, he talked to the technicians that were there, and so he knew how we were, how we were doing. And he had to keep his finger on everything. I mean, he had to know because, we were getting funding from the government, and he was the way the route to. How long did he work? Well, then he'd go home, and he'd work until about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Almost every night that he was home. I figured out that he was working 16 hours a day. And I said to myself, well, hell, if he can do it, why can't I? I tried, I think I lasted 2.5 days. I was exhausted, I couldn't do it. But I did get to 12 hours. That was helpful. Oh, well, it was a long road. It's great. And I appreciate your coming up to here.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, it's all pleasure.
Anything else I can say? I mean, I can tell you stories if you're interested. There's a lot going on.
I was gonna ask you, if there's one thing that you could right now come to mind to tell, what would it be?
Oh, no, there is no one thing. My mind is just open to all these experiences, people experiences. There was some bad, there was some not so. And they could usually involve people that didn't perform well, so that was sad. So we had
I've also been tasked with making a delivery. This is for you.
Thank you.
Not there.
It's a digital tape of, it's called Hidden Figures.
Oh,
I guess I haven't heard about it.
Oh.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I'll enjoy it. Nominated for 3 Academy Awards.
Oh, yeah.
Read the back,
Okay, I recognize this little lady in the right.
read the back.
I'm pretty happy. I can't remember.
Been suggested you take a look at the back of it.
Oh.
Hidden Figures tells the incredible untold story of Katherine Johnson,
Oh, Catherine
Taraji P. Henson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. Brilliant African American women working at NASA who served as the brains behind the launch into orbit of astronaut John Glenn. A stunning achievement that turned around the space race. Clearly, yes. The visionary trio crossed all gender and racial lines and inspired generations. I guess so. Thank you so much for that.
Less than a year later, Apollo 13 occurred, and I was wondering, as I think about when I read the book and when I saw the movies, there was that time when they were, and this is the only way I can think of a gyroscope, when they were trying to position the orbital unit, and they were using like the Earth and put it in the center of the window, and that's how they would be able to figure out where they were, and I assume it's because the gyroscope, which tells them where they are, you know, in a plane, that was one of the instruments obviously damaged. Were you at all involved in the Apollo 13?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't.
yeah.
But one thing I will tell you that these instruments aren't perfect. So in time, they drift. So things, you know, can kind of tip again. We want to keep that platform perfectly level throughout the duration, but it's not possible. We know they drift. So when they get up in space, they'll check on it. And the way to check it, they have a sextant, and they okay?
Yeah.
They triangulate, and they have a star catalog up there. And they pick 2 stars, they shoot the stars, and then they find out exactly where they are and make the corrections in the system.
Wow.
Okay, so that's available to them.
Yeah.
And I remember that, in fact, that's when I met, was it Armstrong? I think it was Neil Armstrong. They came to the lab to learn how to use that sextant, because we designed the laboratory, was designed by Phil Bowden and his group at the laboratory. And so they came, and the one I sat with for lunch at the faculty club at MIT was Neil Armstrong. I have a little picture of sitting right outside. And that's memento.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great.
I think at this point we'll have everybody go outside where Lisa Sapuppo, Mike's daughter, has brought in a little array of refreshments and drinks for everybody to enjoy. So maybe if people want to ask you any